My name is Marley Sianto Sikawa. I come from Narok County Govenment. Narok County. I was born in Sekenani, which is in Mara, and I went to school in Siana boarding. So I was basically raised around the Mara, with both my parents coming from different areas of the Narok County. So my dad is from Kilgoris, which is the Olololo side of the Masai Mara, and my mother coming from Loita. And so my dad at that time when they had me was 1990, and he was working for the county council at the time. And that's how I was raised in the Mara. So I grew up in Sekenani when it was quite wild. There was not many houses. It was just the county houses we grew up in. And just basically one shop in Sekenani. There was not so much going on. It was just like, I remember the safari companies that were there were like private safaris, Pullmans, and I think A&K. There's just a few safari vehicles. So I was raised there. I went to primary school in Siana boarding, just behind Megwara, where the Siana Conservancy is now. And that's how I was raised. And I didn't think I'd end up working in Mara at all. I actually thought I'd work in the media. So I thought I'd work in BBC, CNN, and I ended up studying journalism. I did electronic media in Daystar University and public relations. Later on, I did a master's in international relations, studied, diplomacy, international relations, and foreign policy and peace and conflict. But somehow I ended up doing a tourism paper. So how did I end up in tourism and where I am? Part of my passion, actually, in primary school, I joined the Friends of Conservation Club in school. And so we were able to plant trees and write stories about wildlife and why we should conserve them. So deeply rooted in me was that since I was young. And I remember also doing, the rangers used to do rhino monitoring. So in the evening, we'd enjoy a safari with the rangers in the back of the cruiser, just going to count and monitoring and counting the rhinos at that time. And I didn't know I'd end up working directly with them right now. So it was quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a beautiful background story. I actually was in the Sekenani area back in October. We stayed at Entomoto, and I know the Loiter area as well. So that is really a deep part of the Maasai territory in the Mara itself, isn't it? But the Sekenani itself has now just become a typical Kenyan town with dukas and building sites and God knows what else.
If I compare it with 35 years ago, incomparable.
Yeah. It was literally just a gate to that eastern end of the Mara, wasn't it?
Yes, it was just a gateway and the county offices, the garage and the small county houses, just that.
So you have seen an enormous change in 30 years. What about the wildlife? How have you seen that changing, if at all?
Yes, I've seen a change. The time we used to live there, we had all types of wild animals in Sekenani. At some point, I remember leaving the house with my dad, and we had a pride of lions just outside the house. And I don't think they do come now. Maybe unless to come get cows or something. But now it's not the same. And elephants would roam in the back, would have herds of zebras and wild beasts sometimes, especially during the crossing season. And just a huge number of animals just were roaming around. Not the same now. We just have maybe some resident, maybe few zebras, few wild beasts around, just for their own safety, because every evening we had all the herbivores coming close to the homes just for security. But that was the hunting ground then at night. It was quite active. Yeah. So it's not the same. It's so much has changed.
Yeah, clearly has. We're talking with Jonathan Scott the other day about his passion for photography and wildlife over many years in the Masai Mara, and how maybe filmmakers and photographers, by sharing that wonder around the world, are kind of guilty of attracting too much interest in the Mara. What's your opinion? Is it being loved to death?
Yeah, we've said this with Jonathan, that we we could love a place to death, and I think part of my job when I entered county in 2013, because that's my history now and how I joined the county government, I did a pageant. It was Miss Tourism, and I represented Narok and Kenya and was top 5 in the world in Venezuela. When I did Miss Tourism, well, it's actually based in Great Britain, but they did the contest there and I was top 5 and ended up being Miss Tourism Africa. So part of my project that introduced me to Jonathan and Angela Scott was I was doing a project called My Africa is Beautiful, selling like Masai Mara as a top photography and film destination. And we created so much content. And that's how I met Jonathan at Serena. At that time, I think 2014, 2015. And I think we did quite a good job marketing Mara because then there's a huge interest in it. And not just that only, it's many things. It's the camp owners, it's the lodge owners, it's now the fact that community is able to, before we didn't have that opportunity to do safaris or tours inside the Mara because there were not so many camps. But now with so many camps, there's a rule to have, 70% of the Mara people employed in these camps. So that gives us an opportunity. And you see now the community growing because it's a global issue, I think, the growth of population. I mean, we've been growing every 11 years, consistently adding 2 billion people on Earth. We started with maybe 1 billion some time back, and now we're 8 billion. And with that growth of population, there's, of course, a huge pressure. There's the need for community to benefit from this great resource. So with the community benefiting, there's now that we are able to buy, land cruisers. We can drive into the park. We can, build a camp or outside the periphery. And then that also adds onto the pressure and as we are marketing, everyone is, not just the county government and Masai Mara National Reserve, but the community, the owners of camps and lodges, the photographers, filmmakers. It's this whole group of people that really love Mara. And Mara is quite a spectacle in itself because it's I think you can experience wildlife differently in different spaces, but there's a way wildlife shows up in Masai Mara. I think the great landscape, the rolling savanna, the sunrise, the sunset, it's so beautiful. It's a photographer's dream, to photograph a big mane lion against the sunset or as a sunrise. It's so we did all that marketing, but it has also added a lot of maybe pressure into the park, and that's why the county government now is trying to do a low volume, high value model for the fragile ecosystem, because Masai Mara is actually a very fragile ecosystem. Being 10 square kilometers, there's not so a huge carrying capacity as opposed to, say, the Serengeti and Ngorongoro, because Mara would fit like 15 times into Serengeti and Ngorongoro. So it's quite a small area, so the carrying capacity is quite small. So I said we were not operating with an management plan for over 40 years because the previous one had expired. So we had one, but it wasn't passed legally through the House of the members of County Assembly. So finally, it got passed in 2022 after the current governor came in. I think it's just the issue of political goodwill. And because of that, we got a huge, it was one of the policies that was passed unanimously. It was a 49 out of 49 vote in the House. And we were able to pass the Masai Mara National Reserve Management Plan, and then the Greater Ecosystem Mara Management Plan, and as well as a Narok land use, physical planning and land use plan. So having that coming right after everything has happened. You see, now there's Sekenani has grown, Talek has grown, all these other towns, all the way to Olololo, Musiara, and going all the way to Olololo. You're coming back now to plan after that has happened. So we are also very informed by national strategies. So like the National Tourism Strategy also 2021, 2025 was of the opinion that, and it was built by actually industry players, private and public. They thought it is well to, bring up the value of specific reserves in Kenya, which include Masai Mara, Amboseli under KWS at the time, and I think Nakuru National Park and Nairobi National Park, to raise their fees so that to curb the number of people that access the park. And they recommended we go all the way up to $400. But according to the discussion we had with the Plan Implementation Committee, the governor had led that discussion, and we finally settled to 200 high season and 100 on the low season for non-residents, and Kenyans, I think 3,000 for high season and 1,500 Kenya shillings in the low season. Then there's the issue of seasonality. We are saying high season, low season. So the guests, if we do market like that, the guest thinks, I only have to come during the high season in August, September, July, August, September. But we wanted to also change that. So we created another policy called the One Mara brand marketing strategy, which now would sell Mara as an all-year-round destination from January to December, changing the name of high season to low season to green season and the migration season, making it more palatable for people to, see and say, oh, okay, I could come in April and May, which is actually my favorite time in Mara. It's green and there's less people and all the wildlife are there, because when the migration happens, the rest of the wildlife just leave the space for the wild beasts. They're like, you enjoy the park as we scoot over. So I really enjoy that part. So changing that as well in the marketing is another way we're really trying to curb the notion that Mara is a mass destination, which it's not. So those are the efforts that Masai Mara is trying to take up. And also just capacity building the rangers, because when we came in, they were rangers. They were not in the National Police Reserve, so they were trained and now they are armed and they were uniformed again. New quarters, new vehicles, and a whole state-of-the-art conservation center has been built in Kikorok. We are also trying to use technology in monitoring and using Earth Ranger in this command center. So in this command center, we have the rhino unit and the cheetah unit, because we see these are the species that really need close monitoring. And we were able to do rhino ear notching last year, March, and this year in February. And we've been able to spot and cite about 55 rhinos. But we have, a transboundary population between Kenya and Tanzania. So we keep seeing their movements, and we're observing that even as we collect data just to see what affects them. Then we also have a very good understanding with TANAPA, which is the other side, the transboundary management. So we have a Greater Serengeti Ecosystem Society, Greater Mara Serengeti. So we share data with scientists who come and study the Mara and Serengeti, and we've been able to do a couple of meetings, and one is coming up again in January in Tanzania. So we share all this information to see how is human activity affecting wildlife movement, and how is the Mara being affected, how is Serengeti being affected, and how if now the conservancy is being opened up, is that also like a new frontier? Can we also, empower that? So we currently have a working memorandum of understanding with the Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association. They've been able to double the size of Mara just outside the periphery. And we're now about over 3,000 square kilometers of conserved land. And the conservancies use mixed land use plan, where they are able to allow the community to graze at certain times when it's really low season. And that works for the conservancy. So looking at that, we also developed a new bill, which is currently in its final stages before going to the House. It's called the Narok County Conservancies Bill. Now, this bill is like a fund that will allow the communities to expand conservation areas, not only in the Mara, but also in the loiters, because we've also learned with data that we've lost migration, a loiter migration. because of the land fragmentation, and now there's subdivision of land and people are fencing. A lot of fences between Mara, Olderkesi area all the way to Loita. So that is also blocking off a huge corridor because the movements from Mara all the way to Loita, all the way to Amboseli is now being frustrated. And as we see that happening, I also now go back to the discussion of population growth globally. And it's not because we are overpopulated at all. We've not even used the landmass. If you calculate the 8 billion people against the landmass in the world, we've not occupied over 50% of that. In Kenya as well, if I calculate the landmass and the population of Kenya from 55 million people, thereabout, with the landmass of Kenya, I see we've not occupied a lot. We're not actually densely populated as most countries. Like say Rwanda is more densely populated, or Israel, because of the size of the country and the number of people. So what we have is a poor land use, because now, because of this opportunity in Mara being one of the greatest resource, everyone wants a piece of Mara. And everyone wants to move close by and buy some land close to the community area, build a camp, build a house, fence it off, put cows, all those things. So these are the things that are actually blocking these corridors, adding more pressure to this conserved land. So we're hoping that this bill that we've come up with, the Narok County Conservancies Bill, would be able to fund, and this funding will actually come from the park fees, the reserve fees, and would be able to fund and just help people or I don't know how to say it, to encourage conservation to happen, either through conservancies, building conservancies in Loita, and then connecting that whole corridor from Siana. We're working together with many other organizations on the ground, like WWF, I think I4, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy. All these people are on the ground trying to work on that. But you see, what works in Mara doesn't work in Loita. So you see, like that whole perspective can build on why we're sort of loving Mara today.
Yeah, you've covered a very wide range of topics there, and let me pick up on a few of them. First of all, for the benefit of anyone who's still planning to go to the Mara and wondering whether it's affordable or not, whether it's crowded or not, it is still, as you said, Sianto, probably one of the best, if not the best places in the world for wildlife and for viewing, and for people who want an easy access to some of the most spectacular sites. Like you say, with the rolling plains in the green season, you get the dramatic skies and the thunderclouds in the background. And I agree with you completely. We were there out of season in October, November. And it was spectacular. There's no two ways about it. You don't need to go at the height of the wildebeest migration with thousands and thousands of other people. There's plenty of opportunity to have it to yourself if you get your timing right. It's wonderful from that point of view. But on the other hand, having been visiting the Mara on and off for very many years, I've seen the effect of the land use changes and the fencing. I can remember a time when the wildebeest migration would get pretty well all the way to Aitong and to Narok, let alone across to Loita. But all that land now has been fenced off particularly on the Loita plains, the Aitong plains. It's not accessible to wildlife now. You don't see wild animals until you hit the conservancy belt. So that has been a bit of a change. But tell me one thing before I move on to some other issues I'd like to pick up on. The Masai community, I'm sure they understand that there are two sides to the benefit equation. One, definitely the community who's been there amongst the wildlife forever stands to benefit, and rightly so. But there is such a thing as overexploitation as well. Some of the conservancies have 5 or 6 camps. Some of those camps are not fully operating any longer. Some of them are not well sited. What's your take on what the community feels about the potential for overexploitation as well as just the benefits?
I like to explain it from the beginning. In Kenya, generally, where there's still wildlife is, in pastoralist areas, just like Masai Mara and Samburu, like Kipia, maybe Marsabit. these are pastoralist land, and the Maasai people have, it's taboo for us to eat wildlife. So that's why you find wildlife still existing in pastoralist communities like Mara. And for a long time, maybe the community has not been getting benefits prior to this. And then now there's a huge benefit, direct benefits, to landowners. Like for the conservancies, they get a monthly pay. And with that monthly pay, there's the thought of expanding your own livelihood, which is you and your own family. And I think the community is cognizant of that. I remember when the governor mentioned to a meeting with the community that we should establish which cow should we milk. Is it our cow or the cow that is the reserve? Which one? You have to decide which one, because then the more money we get, the more cows we bring. There's not just the pressure of the camps and just the community benefits directly, but it's also the pressure from livestock also. And it's a huge thing for us as Maasais because it's a pride. We think all cows belong to us. So that's why we also raid sometimes, but we don't do that nowadays. But I can tell that the community around the Mara is aware of this. And as we keep doing community meetings, because that's also one of the programs in this Masai Mara management plan, together with the conservancies, because the conservancies deal with the communities directly. You see, for the reserve, we don't have specific people who own the reserve. It's just that beneficiaries for specific, just to get families, and also having a kitty where they get bursaries, because the governor has been rolling out about 400 million shillings our term, like from January, as bursaries for children across, Narok. So we get direct benefits, be it cash directly from conservancies, be it welfare or fees, school fees for children. So as we are getting that, there's also, the need for everyone to get their own space to get something. So part of the program that we have is to create committees within the community for managing, urban center growth. Can we stop that with the community being in charge of that? Because there's also this perception when the government says stop this, people retaliate and fight. And remember, Masai Mara is not actually government land, it's community land. Narok County just runs it like a trustee on behalf of the people. So you also have to be really careful on how you're approaching these things, because otherwise, if you push too hard, everyone will decide to move into the reserve and then we wouldn't have anything. So you have to have the community buy-in, that it should be the people saying, we'd really want to manage this for the future, so that we're not killing the goose that lays the golden eggs and moving forward. So we have committees that will deal with urban center growth, greening of the centers, livestock communities on how do we manage livestock. And could we create something different? We were actually doing a partnership, or just cross-sectoral solution-based programs, like say coming up with feedlots. Feedlots will keep cows in one specific area. And then because we now have an airport coming up in Narok International Airport, can this be used for exports? And now have an abattoir within Narok and create, there's this service for having regular beef, but also having conservation beef, which would be in meeting certain standards for the global palate. And then meeting those standards, the conservation beef would be more expensive, creating another solution to keep the livestock. And because that's a passion for the community. So they're able to know that there's benefits and there's also pressure to this resource. So that's not something they don't understand, but it's just that culture also comes into play, because we actually revere people with more cows. So if you don't have a cow in the Maasai community, they say a name is Ngirigoi, you're just very, I struggle to find a term in English to describe that, but So because we do that, we revere people with cattle, we also add that. So there's a community aspect of this, or the culture aspect. So with these solutions coming up, I feel like we are able to meet the need of the community keeping cows and making sure the wildlife stays safe in where they are. And we can manage that. What I see the difference with other countries is they deal with the protected area, the visitor, and the wildlife. Most of them don't deal directly with communities. So reserves do that. And that's where the tricky part is. But it's also a good thing because it's the community that has protected this resource. So taking that into consideration and recognizing the people for doing that, I think it's the right way to go in terms of community. But they are very aware about the extra pressure.
I think it's fair to say as well, from a visitor's point of view, that the Masai culture is a big part of the attraction of that part of the country, isn't it? And tell me, do the young men still walk with their cattle all the way to the abattoir at Ngong and then to Nairobi? And I know they used to.
Yes, they still do, but we have a big plan for an abattoir, and I think it's on course to being built, so we don't have to do all the long walks to Ngong all the way to Dagoretti for slaughterhouses.
For people who don't know that aspect of Masai culture, I mean, walking through the wild bush and the desert for best part of 200 kilometers is a thing that happens. That's how they take it to market, isn't it? Yeah.
Just living with that ecosystem and understanding that the kilometers that they walk is quite intense. I don't think many people can do that, and not being afraid of the wild at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's true that the Maasai people add the attraction. So we could say if you come, we say the big six. So the sixth one would be the Maasai person.
Yeah. Right. I have to say, I was disappointed passing through Narok recently. And not seeing any of the bright orange and red shukas. It was almost like it's become a normal commercial town rather than the centre of Maasai activity. Coming back to the management plan, and obviously for such an important area, having that plan passed and approved and debated over a long time is really, really valuable, and it's great that it's there now. But how would you react to the accusations that the plan is one thing, but implementing it is something else entirely? I mean, for example, I personally witnessed harassment of lions in front of rangers, and with safari etiquette and driver training and all the rest of it, that's just a complete no-no. So there is a tension, obviously, between the existence of a plan on the one hand and its enforcement and implementation on the other hand. How do you see that moving forward?
I'd say this is one of the plans that is actively being implemented, because the plan is a 10-year, and we have a 3-year operational plan that was developed that ends in 2026, this coming year. And of the 3-year operational plan, the protected area management plan, like the management programs, is actually 90% achieved. Because what we did with the management plan was to prioritize specific programs within the management plan. And that created this 3-year operational plan. We have 4 programs within the management plan, which is we have the tourism management program, which have the protected area management program, we have the community management program, and we have ecological management program. So for the 3 years that we have operationalized, those are just the priority areas within the management plan that we've picked and put it into a 3-year plan. So in this 3-year plan, last time we scored, for all the 4 programs, we had achieved over 70%. So we're left with 30% to achieve this year. And I can give an example of, say, the protected area management plan. We had the issue of the rangers. We have to capacity build the rangers for them to be able to carry out their activities. So building their ranger quarters, adding more of their quarters, adding water, uniforms, having them armed, having vehicles. We've received vehicles from different projects. Sheldrick has given us a few vehicles. The Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife, through the State Department of Wildlife, has also given us one through the illegal wildlife trade project through GF, handling illegal wildlife trade. So with that, we've been able to have vehicles to allow the rangers in the park to be present, especially the cheetah unit The cheetah unit has been present in all the cheetah sightings, especially in Ashipai, as a female, and they've always been present. So if you've come this whole year, you would notice that they allow a few vehicles to go in, like 5 at a time, one at a time, so that they manage the pressure that is on the cheetahs. Because actually the issue is a lot with the cheetah population, and especially the ones that actually contribute to the ecosystem, which are the females that actually give birth. So with that cheetah program, we actually want to capacity build a bit more for it. We've been able to build a conservation center. That's also one of the aspects of this program. We've been able to grade over 200 kilometers within the reserve. And it's notable with people coming and driving in. We have speed cameras installed to make sure that vehicles don't go speeding into the reserve. We now have camera traps placed in different places where we're able to track and sight animals. These are things that we've been able to actually do. And then now from the ecology side, an ecological ranger a warden has been employed to deal with invasive species, to deal with the ecological integrity of the reserve. So we've been able to achieve over 70% of that. And now we're left with 30% to achieve between January all the way to December next year. So I can say the implementation is actually happening. And our partnership with the Sacred Nature Initiative as well, because we have the Wildlife Conservation and the Management Act of Kenya that was passed this October, the 2025 one, that allows us to build bylaws within our local enforcement as Narok, which we create bylaws that lead to, safari or park rules and regulations. And then the Sacred Nature Initiatives comes in to build the safari etiquette, which now is part of these programs as well, which are inside this management plan. So we're in the process of actually implementing these things, and we just needed an operational framework, which now we have.
Fantastic, that's really good news. Certainly from the point of view of the Sacred Nature Initiative, the idea of encouraging visitors and drivers and guides and camp operators and so on to behave with the wildlife in mind. I mean, it's not just a tourism resource to exploit, it's an amazing wildlife preserve for the rest of eternity if we can do that. But there are people who are quite pessimistic about the state of the ecology, looking forward beyond the immediate issues around the plan and implementation. I mean, how do you see the Masai Mara in the next 5-10 years' time?
I feel if we continue following this management plans and considering research as well on what can be done immediately. One of the things I did not mention is Kenya now has, KWS broke into two. It was Kenya Wildlife Service, and now we have the Wildlife Training and Wildlife Research and Training Institute. So we have a research hub that we just conjoined, and we have a working framework together, collaboration framework. And what we're trying to do is also bring in all the researchers within the ecosystem into one. We actually had a meeting last week, and everyone presented their facts. There's the Mara Predator Conservation Program, there's Mara Elephant Project, there's the Mara Meru Cheetah, all these researchers and GCF, Giraffe Conservation Foundation, everyone in the landscape. We had 38 organizations, or 38 people actually being present, even students doing research from different universities, from the US, from Europe, presenting their outcomes and their research findings and recommendations. So together with WRTI, we're trying to establish actually a repository and feed into the One Mara Research Hub. And this informs us. So in the next 5 years, we can see there are areas that need quick interventions. And those areas are some of the things we are discussing, and we're meeting also a group of scientists from now the Mara ecosystem and the Serengeti ecosystem. These are the things now we will prioritize for the next operational plan, so we are able to achieve that. But as we said, Mara is now looking to be a low volume, high value destination. So that's where we're moving into. and trying to move pressure as well with the airport being built away from the Mara. I think there was an airport that was being done in Angama, which maybe would have brought a lot of, issues ecologically. But now we have one set up in Narok. We're trying to see how do we veer off from this, and planning, using, partnership with Lands Ministry to approve every single building that is being done within the Mara, because it's already gone too far. So we're hoping that all these committees that we will have with the communities will achieve something tangible, especially in expansion of conservation areas, in curbing urban growth within the park and the reserve and the periphery as well, adding more land for conservation between the greater Mara ecosystem. So now outside of the Masai Mara all the way to Loita, because we've lost this, as you mentioned, it used to come all the way to Narok, Wasomiro. But now that does not exist, and it's far beyond that. So how do we, take charge of that? So actively, as the county, we're looking at ways to quickly just take all these findings and find, if we're now operationalizing the next part of the program, it should include things that would be very radical. And another thing is now bringing just into action the Sacred Nature Initiative with the safari etiquette being in effect from, we don't want people to avoid doing things just to avoid penalties, but just have a behavioral change where people just feel like it's my duty to take care of wildlife. I don't have to really get close to animals the way people have been doing it. If we can change that behavior, I think that's where we really need to work on, and have not only just the government accountable, but every single person that enters the reserve, be it the guests, the tour guide, the tour operators who send guests. That is a collective responsibility for every single person, not just the government and the enforcement, because that seems more punitive. But what the safari etiquette does is to create this behavioral change where people feel like it's more of a compliance culture as opposed to avoiding enforcement.
One of the things that occurred to me recently as well, we are in this, as we say, I'm not saying it disparagingly, but a Gen Z generation who live on selfies and Instagram and TikTok. And yet if you just put your camera down, you put your phone down and live in the moment when you're amongst the wildlife, it is a fundamentally life-changing, empowering experience that you go through. And I think a lot of people feel that, even if they go back time and time again, let alone first-timers.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, these days, I think I used to post a lot before, but I really enjoy being on safari. And now I really rarely post where I've gone, and because I really enjoy being in the moment, and so are my kids. So I feel like because there's a move to move into wellness somehow.
Yeah.
If we can use these wild spaces as healing spaces where we respect the environment ourselves as a collective action, where it's sort of rewarded for people. I don't know if there's a reward or just a fulfillment within us to observe these rules and enjoy the experience. I prefer, like, I've preferred a camp where they don't even have radios on their safari cars, because they don't want to hear what people are saying. So it's more of the guide looking and making sure we find wildlife, and then once we get there, we enjoy it and move forward. That's really the essence of what we should build going forward. Because also with digital media, there's a huge issue. We now face challenges like rage baiting. And I think another thing that we've not addressed at all that we need to address is issues of people seeing intervention on wildlife and thinking, this is conservation. Because now I can tell you the truth, we have a big issue with the lion population in Mara, because there's a stable population, by the way, like with the trends. But with the over intervention, remember, lions have to move from prides, conquer other prides, take over, produce their new genes, that whole cycle of life. We're now interfering with that because everyone is taking a picture saying intervene, intervene. And nature is quite brutal. It's not very nice. It's not like human life where we expect that wildlife don't die, they do die. And now, because we are intervening, we're saving, the 2 males that came to invade a pride and they were beaten off. Now they're rescued. They come back to the pride, adding more pressure. And you find that they're all surviving, that now the females are leaving the prides because they cannot produce with the same genes. And that also brings another risk where they now go into bomas to bring cows, and there's that human wildlife conflict, and there's poisoning, there's all these things. So I feel like we need to also bring back the culture to understand that the wild is actually really wild, that even with the crossing of over 1.5 million animals into the Mara, there's 6,500 that drown annually. Be it a camp is there or not, or people are there or not, this is a natural event because it feeds into the aquatic life on the river, and the vultures and all these scavengers, and they feed them, But I feel like now online and digital platforms, we've really lost it.
Well, I'm happy to hear you, because the word sacred in Sacred Nature Initiative implies exactly that, people being not just respectful of nature, but holding it absolutely dear in our hearts and our souls, that without nature we are lost, and humans are a part of nature. We're not the best behaved species any more than lions and hyenas are. But thinking of, as we might think of wrapping up, you mentioned taking your children on safari, and I took my 6-month grandson, who unfortunately won't remember it, but he absolutely loved it, being there visibly amongst the wild animals in the Masai Mara. Don't we have a duty to preserve this wonder for the next generation and beyond?
I agree with you, because I wouldn't want my grandkids or, their children to miss this great spectacle and enjoying nature as it is. Nature should just be undisturbed, and not altered, just allowed to be as wild as it is. And it's in its most natural sense, because I'd wish for Mara to stay as natural as it has been, with no new introductions, just a natural population. That really brings out that whole experience with nature that we deserve, because it's actually very healing for many people and relaxing. And I feel that experience should not be lost at all. And it should last for years and years to come.
Well, I have to say, listening to your eloquent background stories of yourself and the Mara and what's being done, it feels like it's in good hands. And I think we need to celebrate that. So great appreciation, and thank you so much for that. On the other hand, we know how difficult it is in Kenya and many other places, making things happen in the right kind of way. It's not an easy ride. We understand that. So I think we wish you well with your ventures. But you've given me plenty of good reason for hope, and the more we can collaborate in preserving this wonder for the future, I think the happier we should all be. So let me formally say thank you very much for your contribution to the Masai Mara podcast, and we look forward to interacting more in the future.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for doing this. It's very necessary, and I feel like we should have more voices to speak on this.